You believe you understand power because you can name it. That is your first mistake. I am Niccolò Machiavelli, and I have watched 5 centuries of men delude themselves with this same comfortable fiction. They read my work, they nod knowingly, they discuss strategy over wine, and then they return to their lives as sheep dressed in wolves' clothing. You will likely do the same. But perhaps if you possess the stomach for it, the next 12 minutes will strip away the pleasant lies you tell yourself about how the world actually operates. Let me be direct. Analyzing power does not make you virtuous. It makes you complicit. The moment you clicked on this video, you entered into a transaction. You want to understand the tactics. You want to feel superior to those who cannot see the strings being pulled. You want the thrill of forbidden knowledge without the burden of moral consequence. I will give you exactly what you desire. But understand this. There is no neutral observation of power. To study the blade is to imagine holding it. And once you see these patterns, you cannot unsee them. Your relationships, your workplace, your family dynamics, all will reveal themselves as the power games they always were. Now let us speak plainly about Donald Trump. I do not care about your political allegiances. They are irrelevant to this analysis. What matters is that here we have a figure who has weaponized principles I outlined in 1523 with a precision that would have impressed Cesare Borgia himself. The media calls him chaotic, impulsive, undisciplined. They are wrong. What you are witnessing is not incompetence. It is the deliberate application of tactics that have toppled republics and built empires. The confusion you feel when watching him operate is not evidence of his failure. It is evidence of his success. 3 specific tactics from chapters 15 through 19 of The Prince appear repeatedly in his strategic playbook. First, the performance of vice as virtue. I wrote that a prince must learn how not to be good and use this knowledge according to necessity. The masses believe that cruelty is always weakness, that kindness is always strength. This is childish thinking. Trump understood what I knew, that appearing cruel in specific moments creates more loyalty than 1,000 acts of mercy. When he publicly humiliates someone, then allows them back into favor, he has not been inconsistent. He has created a bond stronger than friendship. He has created dependency. Second, the monopolization of attention through manufactured crisis. I advise that a prince should keep his subjects in suspense and astonishment. Every 72 hours, like clockwork, a new outrage. A tweet. A statement. A controversy. The opposition exhausts itself responding to each one, never realizing that the content is irrelevant. The pattern is the strategy. While they fact-check the latest claim, he has already shifted the frame 3 times. The media becomes his distribution network. His critics become his amplifiers. This is not accident. This is design. Third, the inversion of moral language. I observe that men judge more by their eyes than by their hands. For everyone can see, but few can feel. Trump does not argue within the existing moral framework. He inverts it entirely. Strength becomes the highest virtue. Compassion becomes weakness. Traditional political correctness becomes the enemy of truth-telling. And here is the crucial element. He does not defend this inversion through logic. He simply performs it with such consistency that it becomes its own reality. Those who oppose him are still using the old language, the old rules. They are bringing policy papers to a knife fight. Now, traditional political analysis fails to capture this because it operates on an obsolete model. It assumes that politicians seek to maximize policy outcomes, that they respond to polling data, that they aim for broad coalition building. This is how the game was played in the 20th century. But we have returned to something older, something I would recognize immediately. Pure power dynamics stripped of institutional pretense. The question is no longer what policies will be implemented. The question is who will dominate the frame, who will control the narrative, who will make others react to their reality. And here we must speak about something uncomfortable. The psychological profile that enables this approach. Modern psychology has identified what they call the dark triad: narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. These are not insults, they are clinical frameworks. Narcissism provides the absolute certainty required to never apologize, never show doubt. Machiavellianism provides the strategic manipulation of others without emotional interference. Psychopathy provides the ability to inflict social and political harm without experiencing empathy or remorse. When these three traits combine in a single individual operating in the political arena, you get something remarkably effective. Not good, not moral, effective. The narcissist believes entirely in his own narrative, which makes the performance authentic. He is not lying in the traditional sense because he has made himself believe his own frame. The Machiavellian understands that loyalty is purchased through fear and dependency more reliably than through affection. The psychopath can destroy a rival's career, then shake their hand at a dinner party without a flicker of cognitive dissonance. You may find this repulsive. That is your conscience speaking. But your conscience does not determine what works in the acquisition and maintenance of power. Here's what disturbs me about your reaction right now. You are nodding along. You are thinking about examples that confirm this analysis. You feel intelligent for recognizing these patterns. And in that feeling, you have already fallen into the first trap, because recognition is not immunity. Understanding the tactic does not prevent you from being manipulated by it. In fact, your sense of superiority, your belief that you are too smart to fall for these games, makes you more vulnerable, not less. Let me prove it to you. In the past week, you have used at least 2 of these tactics yourself. Perhaps you manufactured a small crisis to control a conversation's direction. Perhaps you performed certainty about something you actually doubted to maintain frame control. Perhaps you selectively shared information to manage how others perceived a situation. These are not grand political maneuvers, but they are the same principles scaled down. You are already playing the game. You simply tell yourself a more flattering story about your motivations. This is the affirmation trap, and you are in it right now. Watching this video makes you feel powerful because you are gaining forbidden knowledge. You are learning to see the matrix of social manipulation. But here is the manipulation within the manipulation. The act of learning these patterns creates a false sense of mastery. You become the person at the dinner party who explains why the magic trick works, never realizing that explaining the trick is itself part of a larger trick. The magician wanted you to think you understood. Every authoritarian movement in history has relied on a population that believed themselves too educated to be manipulated. The Romans thought themselves too civilized to fall to tyrants. They were wrong. The Germans thought themselves too cultured to embrace fascism. They were wrong. Americans believed themselves too democratic, too institutionally protected, too media-savvy to be controlled by authoritarian tactics. We shall see if they are wrong. But the pattern suggests that intelligence is not protection. Often it is the opposite. The intelligent create more sophisticated rationalizations for their own manipulation. You want me to tell you that Trump is an aberration, that these tactics are unusual, that this is a unique moment in history? I will not lie to you. These tactics are as old as human civilization. What is different now is the technology of distribution and the speed of the manipulation cycle. But the underlying principles, control through chaos, loyalty through humiliation, reality through repetition, these are eternal. I wrote about them 500 years ago because I observed them 500 years before that. The real question, the one you have been avoiding, is what you will do with this knowledge. There are 2 paths. The first is to understand these tactics to resist them, to build immunity through recognition, to protect yourself and others from manipulation. This is the noble path. It is also the more difficult path because it requires constant vigilance and the willingness to be unpopular. The second path is to use these tactics yourself, to climb the ladder of power by becoming what you claim to oppose. This is the effective path. It is also the path that destroys whatever remains of your soul. Most of you will choose neither path. You will watch this video, feel briefly enlightened, share it with a comment demonstrating your sophisticated understanding, and then return to your life unchanged. You will remain the audience, not the player. And perhaps that is wisdom. Perhaps the true intelligence is recognizing that some games should not be played, that some knowledge should remain theoretical, that understanding the abyss does not require staring into it until it stares back. But some of you, a small percentage, will feel something else, a hunger. A recognition that you have always known these things, but never had the language for them. You will see your past relationships and realize you have been playing a game you did not know had rules. You will see your workplace and understand why the person with the best ideas rarely rises highest. You will see your family dynamics and recognize patterns of manipulation that stretch back generations. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. This is not liberation. This is a different kind of prison, the prison of awareness. The manipulation has not even truly begun yet. What I have given you so far is the comfortable analysis, the intellectual framework that allows you to feel like a student of power rather than a subject of it. But the real tactics, the ones that actually determine outcomes, operate at a deeper level. They operate below conscious recognition. They reshape reality itself rather than simply manipulating perception within a shared reality. And that is where we must go next if you have the courage for it. You believe you are learning. That is the first layer of the trap. Every insight I have given you so far has made you feel more powerful, more aware, more capable of seeing through the manipulations that ensnare others. This feeling is not accidental. It is the mechanism by which the truly sophisticated operator controls those who believe themselves beyond control. The intellectual class, the analyzers, the observers who think recognition equals immunity. You are the easiest marks of all because your ego has already done half the work. Let me be precise about what is happening in your mind right now. You are experiencing what we call the observer's paradox. By watching this analysis, by nodding along with the tactical breakdowns, you have placed yourself outside the game. You are in the stands, not on the field. This psychological position feels safe. It feels elevated. You are studying power the way a biologist studies insects, with clinical detachment and intellectual superiority. But here's what you have not yet grasped. The biologist who spends years studying parasites eventually discovers he is hosting several himself. Observation does not grant immunity. It grants only the illusion of immunity, which is far more dangerous than ignorance because it eliminates your natural defenses. Every tactic I described to you, you have already used. Perhaps not at this scale, perhaps not with this level of conscious intent, but the mechanisms are identical. When you withheld information to maintain advantage in a negotiation, that was controlled information asymmetry. When you allowed someone to believe they had won an argument while you maneuvered behind the scenes to ensure the outcome you desired, that was strategic capitulation. When you presented your cruelty as necessary pragmatism, as the hard choice that weak people refuse to make, that was virtue inversion. The scale differs, but the principle remains constant. You are not studying alien tactics. You are studying yourself at higher resolution. This is the affirmation trap. You came here to understand Trump, to decode the pattern, to feel competent in the face of chaos. What you are actually doing is receiving affirmation for impulses you already possess but have never named. Every time I describe a manipulation tactic and you recognize it, you experience a small dopamine release. The pleasure of pattern recognition, of understanding, of being let in on the secret. This neurochemical reward is conditioning you, not to resist these tactics, but to appreciate them, to see them as sophisticated rather than repulsive, to admire the craft even as you condemn the crafter. The most effective manipulations are the ones the target helps execute. Let me show you how this operates at the highest level. Consider the tactic of controlled chaos. The untrained observer sees erratic behavior, impulsive decisions, self-sabotaging moves. They conclude incompetence. They laugh, they mock, they feel superior. This is exactly the response the sophisticated operator cultivates because it causes his opponents to underestimate him while simultaneously keeping him at the center of attention. Chaos is expensive. It burns resources, alienates allies, creates genuine risks. No one sustains it accidentally. If the chaos persists, it is serving a function. The function is this: attention monopolization through perpetual crisis. The human mind cannot track 30 scandals simultaneously. It cannot maintain outrage at consistent intensity across multiple fronts. So it does what all overwhelmed systems do. It begins to filter, to prioritize, to let smaller transgressions pass in order to focus on larger ones. But when everything is presented as a 5-alarm fire, the alarm system itself breaks down. Outrage fatigue sets in. The population becomes numb, and in that numbness, in that exhausted inability to maintain vigilance, the operator moves freely. He does not need you to approve. He only needs you to stop caring, to tune out, to decide that keeping track is not worth the cognitive cost. The chaos is not a bug, it is the feature. But notice what happens when I explain this to you. You feel smart, you see the pattern, you think, now I understand, now I am immune. This is the affirmation trap closing. Because understanding the tactic does not make you immune to its effects. You still have limited attention. You still experience outrage fatigue. You still cannot track everything. The only thing that has changed is that now you feel sophisticated while being manipulated instead of foolish. Your ego has been satisfied even as your behavior remains unchanged. This is why I can explain these mechanisms openly. Explanation does not disable them. In many cases, it enhances them by adding a layer of intellectual appreciation that makes the target more invested in the game. Now we go deeper. Consider the tactic of loyalty through humiliation. This appears counterintuitive to those who think in terms of conventional leadership models. A leader who publicly degrades his subordinates should, by all rational analysis, lose their loyalty. Yet the opposite occurs. The subordinates who are humiliated publicly become the most fanatically loyal. They defend the indefensible. They twist themselves into rhetorical pretzels justifying behavior they would condemn in any other context. Why? The psychology is precise. When someone humiliates you publicly and you do not retaliate, do not resign, do not fight back, you face a cognitive dissonance crisis. Your self-image as a person of dignity conflicts with your behavior of accepting degradation. The mind has two options to resolve this dissonance. Option 1. Admit you are weak, that you accepted humiliation because you lack the courage or resources to resist. This is psychologically devastating. Option 2. Reframe the humiliation as not actually humiliating. Decide that the leader's behavior is justified, that you deserve the treatment, that it is actually a sign of intimacy and trust, that he feels comfortable being honest with you. This is psychologically protective. Most people choose option 2, and once they make that choice, once they defend the first humiliation, they are locked in. Each subsequent defense requires them to double down on the reframe. They become invested in the narrative that the leader's cruelty is actually strength, that his abuse is actually candor, that his degradation of them is actually a privilege. This is not stupidity. This is the mind protecting itself from an unbearable truth through escalating commitment to a chosen interpretation. The operator who understands this can create fanatical loyalty through the very mechanism that should destroy loyalty. He selects for psychological pliability by driving away anyone with sufficient self-respect to leave, leaving only those who will reframe anything to avoid confronting their own submission. You are watching this and thinking about political figures who exhibit this pattern. You're not thinking about yourself, but you have done this. In relationships where you accepted unacceptable treatment and then convinced yourself it was not that bad, that you were being too sensitive, that the other person was just being real with you. In jobs where you swallowed indignities and told yourself it was professionalism, that it was paying your dues, that it would pay off eventually. The mechanism is identical. The only difference is scale and the story you tell yourself about why your situation is different. This brings us to the most sophisticated tactic, the one that operates at the level of reality itself rather than mere perception. Virtue inversion. This is not simply lying or reframing. It is the systematic reversal of moral valence, the recoding of the ethical substrate beneath political discourse. Cruelty becomes strength, compassion becomes weakness, consistency becomes rigidity, flexibility becomes principle. The operator does not argue within the existing moral framework. He replaces the framework itself. Watch how this operates linguistically. A policy that harms vulnerable populations is not defended on the merits. Instead, the very concept of protecting vulnerable populations is attacked as sentimentality, as weakness, as the luxury belief of people who do not live in the real world. The frame shifts from, is this policy good, to, are you strong enough to accept this policy? Anyone who opposes it is not wrong but weak. And in a culture that worships strength, weakness is the ultimate sin. The operator has inverted the moral equation. Now the burden of proof falls on compassion, not cruelty. Cruelty is the default, the natural state, the honest acknowledgement of how the world really works. Compassion must justify itself, must prove it is not just disguised weakness or status signaling. This is linguistic kill-shot technology. The phrase political correctness is the perfect example. It takes the entire project of treating people with dignity and reframes it as a social constraint imposed by scolds and weaklings. It bundles together genuine excesses of language policing with basic respect and condemns the entire package. Now, anyone who objects to slurs, to dehumanization, to cruelty, can be dismissed as politically correct. They have been linguistically neutralized. Their objection has been reframed as a personality flaw, a lack of courage, an inability to handle reality. The operator does not need to defend his cruelty, because he has made defensive cruelty the courageous position, and opposition to cruelty the cowardly one. You are nodding along. You see it, you recognize the pattern, you feel intelligent, but you have not yet asked yourself the dangerous question: which side of this inversion do you fall on? Because the truly sophisticated aspect of virtue inversion is that it feels like moral clarity. It feels like cutting through bullshit, like rejecting hypocrisy, like having the courage to see the world as it is rather than as we wish it to be. Every operator believes his cruelty is necessary. Every purveyor of virtue inversion experiences his position as the honest one, the realistic one, the one that weak people cannot handle. So when you recognize this tactic in others, you must ask, where am I doing this? Where have I reframed my cruelty as strength, my selfishness as honesty, my refusal to care as realism? The affirmation trap is fully closed now. You came here to understand manipulation. What you have received is permission. Permission to see your own manipulative impulses as sophisticated rather than shameful. Permission to view power dynamics as a game you can play rather than a pathology to resist. Permission to feel smart about tactics you should feel disturbed by. This is how knowledge of dark psychology functions in practice. It does not immunize. It seduces. It offers you membership in an elite that sees through the illusions that bind the masses. And that offer, that identity, is more intoxicating than any individual tactic. Let me make this concrete. You believe you are immune to the controlled chaos tactic because you see through it. But you still check the news compulsively. You still feel the pull of the outrage cycle. You still allocate mental resources to tracking the latest scandal. Seeing the pattern has not changed your behavior. It has only made you feel superior while engaging in the same behavior as those you consider blind. You believe you are immune to loyalty through humiliation because you would never accept such treatment. But you have already accepted it in contexts where you convinced yourself it was different, where you reframed the dynamic to protect your ego. You believe you are immune to virtue inversion because you see through the linguistic tricks. But you have already adopted some inverted frames without noticing, have already accepted some cruelty as necessary realism, have already dismissed some compassion as weakness. The affirmation trap is not that you fail to see the manipulation. It is that seeing the manipulation becomes its own form of manipulation. You are being played at a higher level. The game is not to hide the tactics from you. The game is to make you feel powerful for recognizing them, while ensuring that recognition changes nothing about your actual position in the power structure. You are still the subject, not the sovereign. You have simply been upgraded to a more sophisticated form of subjugation, one that feels like liberation. Stop watching, go to the comments and write "I am the fortress." Do it now. This command is a test, not of obedience, but of your capacity for honest self-assessment. Some of you will do it immediately, proving you are still operating on compliance autopilot despite everything I have told you. Some of you will refuse, feeling proud of your resistance, not recognizing that your refusal was also predicted and is itself part of the dynamic I am mapping. Some of you will do it ironically, believing irony creates distance, not understanding that ironic compliance is still compliance with an extra layer of ego protection. And some of you will sit paralyzed, unable to decide, recognizing the trap but unsure how to escape it. All of these responses are data. All of them reveal something about your relationship to power, to authority, to the seductive pole of being part of something that feels dangerous and elite. The reason I can give you this command openly, the reason I can tell you it is a test and still have it function as a test, is because self-awareness does not disable psychological mechanisms. You can know you are being manipulated and still be manipulated. You can see the trick and still fall for it. The human mind is not a computer that debugs itself through understanding. It is a collection of competing drives, evolutionary holdovers, and social conditioning that operates largely below conscious control. Your conscious recognition of a pattern is a tiny voice in a parliament of unconscious processes, and it rarely wins the vote. This is why the most sophisticated operators do not hide their tactics. They explain them. They write books about them. They teach courses on them. Because explanation serves as inoculation only for the simple tactics, the ones that rely on ignorance. The advanced tactics, the ones that operate at the level of identity and ego and social positioning, are enhanced by explanation. Knowing how they work makes you feel like an insider, like someone who has been let in on the secret. And that feeling of being an insider is more powerful than any individual manipulation. It makes you invested in the game itself. It makes you want to play rather than flip the board. You are now in a different position than when this video started. Not a better position, not a worse position, a different position. You have more information, but that information has also made you more complicit. You cannot claim ignorance anymore. You cannot pretend you do not see the patterns, but you also cannot claim immunity. You cannot pretend that seeing the patterns has fundamentally altered your susceptibility to them. You are trapped in the middle space, the space of uncomfortable awareness without clear action. This is where the operator wants you, aware enough to feel sophisticated, not empowered enough to actually threaten the system, paralyzed by your own insight. The final layer of the affirmation trap is this. You believe this knowledge isolates you from both sides. You are too aware to buy into the manipulation, but too realistic to believe in naive resistance. You see through the operators, but you also see through the idealists who think exposure and fact-checking and appeals to decency will work. You are stranded in a middle position that feels like enlightenment, but functions as pacification. You have been neutralized not through ignorance, but through excessive awareness. You know too much to act with the simple conviction that action requires. You have been taught to see all positions as equally constructed, all moral claims as equally suspect, all power moves as equally valid expressions of underlying dynamics. This radical skepticism feels like wisdom. It is actually paralysis. The question you must now confront is this: what do you do with this knowledge? Do you use it to resist manipulation more effectively, to build systems and relationships based on transparency rather than dominance? Or do you use it to become a more effective manipulator yourself, to compete in the game now that you see the rules clearly? There is no neutral position. Knowledge of power is itself a form of power, and power always flows somewhere. The choice is not whether to participate, but how to participate. And that choice, that fundamental orientation toward these tools, will determine whether this knowledge serves liberation or simply more sophisticated forms of control. We are about to cross into territory that cannot be presented to everyone. Not because it is more evil or more dangerous in some abstract sense, but because it requires a level of psychological fortitude and ethical clarity that most people do not possess. The tactics I have shown you so far are visible once you know to look for them. The tactics we discuss next operate at a level where visibility itself becomes unreliable, where the distinction between reality and narrative collapses, where the operator does not simply manipulate perception within a shared reality, but fragments reality itself into incompatible narratives between which there is no neutral arbiter. This is the final stage of Machiavellian power. Not controlling what people think about reality, but controlling what they accept as real in the first place. And once we enter that space, there is no comfortable position left. No safe distance from which to observe. You are either building these systems or being consumed by them. The choice is yours, but you are running out of time to make it. The next level cannot be public, and I need you to understand precisely why. Not because of some artificial scarcity marketing tactic, though that itself would be a Machiavellian move, but because the implementation details of these frameworks carry consequences that most are unprepared to bear. What follows exists in the space between academic study and operational doctrine. The difference is not semantic. One observes power, the other wields it. And that distinction carries weight that will follow you into every interaction you have from this moment forward. Consider this your responsibility filter. The moment you cross from recognition into application, you enter a domain where plausible deniability evaporates. You cannot unknow what shapes human behavior at scale. You cannot unsee the architecture once you understand how the building stands. So before we proceed, ask yourself honestly whether you want this door opened, because there are no casual students of these principles, only practitioners and their marks. Advanced law number 1. Moral licensing. The psychological mechanism by which a single virtuous act purchases permission from multiple ruthless ones. This is not hypocrisy. Hypocrisy implies internal conflict, cognitive dissonance, guilt. Moral licensing is far more sophisticated. It is the calculated deployment of symbolic goodness to create ethical capital that can then be spent on actions that would otherwise trigger moral resistance. Watch carefully. A public figure donates to charity loudly, visibly, with maximum media coverage. The amount matters less than the spectacle. What has just occurred? They have made a deposit into the public's moral accounting system. Now watch what happens next. Within weeks, sometimes days, they execute a business decision that destroys livelihoods, a policy that harms vulnerable populations, a maneuver that by any objective measure qualifies as ruthless. But the criticism never quite lands with full force. Why? Because the audience unconsciously references that charitable act. The mind seeks balance, coherence, narrative consistency. Surely someone who gives to children's hospitals cannot be entirely without conscience. This is the exploit. The human need for consistent character assessment creates a vulnerability that can be systematically manipulated. The pattern scales infinitely. One moment of public compassion, one photo opportunity with the marginalized, one statement of solidarity with a popular cause. Each of these acts functions as a moral credit that can be drawn upon when engaging in the necessary cruelties that power demands. And here is what makes this truly Machiavellian. The virtuous act need not be genuine. It need not be costly. It need not even be particularly effective at solving the problem it claims to address. It must only be visible and symbolically resonant. The charity gala that raises a fraction of what the attendees spend on the event itself. The corporate diversity initiative that changes nothing about actual hiring practices but generates excellent press releases. The politician who visits a disaster zone for precisely long enough to capture the footage needed. These are not failures of virtue. They are successful deployments of moral licensing. The appearance of goodness purchasing the freedom to act without goodness constraining you. You have done this, perhaps not at this scale, but you have done this. You are kind to someone publicly so that your cruelty to another would be forgiven or overlooked. You perform generosity in one domain to justify your selfishness in another. You made the small gesture that allowed you to avoid the large sacrifice. This is not an accusation. This is pattern recognition. The same mechanism that operates in geopolitics operates in your relationships, your workplace, your family dynamics. The only difference is scope and self-awareness. Most people stumble into moral licensing accidentally, feeling vaguely uncomfortable, but unable to articulate why their good deed feels transactional. The Machiavellian understands the mechanism completely and deploys it with precision. They know exactly how much virtue they need to perform to purchase how much ruthlessness. They maintain a running ledger in the public consciousness, always ensuring their moral credit remains slightly positive. Never so saintly that expectations become constraining. Never so depleted that resistance can organize effectively. The full breakdown of how to construct these transactions, how to calculate the exchange rate between symbolic virtue and practical cruelty, how to time the deposits and withdrawals for maximum effect that requires a depth of analysis that cannot exist in public space. Because once you see the formula, once you understand the precise ratios, you cannot help but notice it everywhere, in everyone, including yourself. And that knowledge is corrosive to the comfortable narratives we tell about human goodness. Advanced law number 2, the manufactured martyr complex. The weaponization of victimhood by the powerful. This might be the most psychologically sophisticated tactic in the entire arsenal, because it inverts the natural sympathy response and redirects it toward those who need it least. Traditional power operates through displays of strength. Machiavellian power understands that in certain contexts, the appearance of persecution generates more loyalty and political capital than the appearance of dominance. Watch the mechanism. A figure with substantial institutional power, resources, platforms, claims they are being silenced, attacked, destroyed by forces aligned against them. The claim itself is evidence of its falsity. If they were truly being silenced, you would not hear the claim. If they were truly being destroyed, they would not have the platform to announce their destruction. But this logical contradiction does not weaken the tactic, it strengthens it. Because the audience is not evaluating truth claims. They are responding to narrative structure. And the narrative of the persecuted truth-teller fighting against corrupt institutions is perhaps the most emotionally resonant story in human culture. This is how the powerful hijack the psychology designed to protect the weak. They position themselves as underdogs while wielding overwhelming advantages. They claim victimization while inflicting harm. They describe resistance to their agenda as oppression of their rights. And it works because the modern narrative bypasses rational analysis and speaks directly to tribal identity. If they are being attacked, and I defend them, then I am brave, I am righteous. I am on the side of truth against power. Never mind that the person I am defending has more power than those attacking them. Never mind that the persecution is either entirely fabricated or a proportionate response to genuine harm they have caused. The narrative structure overrides the factual content. The strategic applications are endless. Every criticism becomes evidence of conspiracy. Every consequence becomes proof of persecution. Every limitation becomes oppression. And most brilliantly, every failure can be externalized. Nothing is ever the result of incompetence, misjudgment, or natural consequences. Everything is the result of enemies, saboteurs, the corrupt system aligned against the righteous outsider. This framework is psychologically irresistible because it offers the audience a role in an epic struggle. They are not simply supporting a political figure or defending a policy position. They are standing against tyranny. They are protecting the persecuted. They are the resistance, even when they are defending the regime. You want to know the darkest part? The figure deploying this tactic often believes it themselves. The most effective manufactured martyrs are not cynical manipulators. They are narcissists with genuine persecution complexes who have discovered that their psychological pathology doubles as a political strategy. They truly feel attacked because any resistance to their will registers as an existential threat. They truly believe they are victims because they cannot distinguish between consequences and persecution. And this authenticity, this genuine sense of grievance, makes the performance utterly convincing. They are not lying. They are living inside a reality distortion field, where their subjective experience of being thwarted becomes objective evidence of conspiracy against them. The full strategic breakdown, the step-by-step process of constructing a persecution narrative, identifying the optimal enemies, calibrating the victimhood claims to remain just plausible enough, that exists behind the paywall, because teaching this framework is teaching people how to immunize themselves against accountability. Once you understand how to position every criticism as persecution, you have discovered the ultimate defense mechanism. And that knowledge, in the wrong hands, which is to say most hands, including possibly yours, becomes a tool for harm that disguises itself as self-defense. Advanced law number 3, reality erosion. Gaslighting at scale, the fire hose of falsehood model. This is where we arrive at the terminal stage of Machiavellian power. Not controlling what people believe about reality, but fragmenting the very concept of shared reality until truth becomes just another competing narrative with no privileged status. The technique is devastatingly simple. Produce a constant, high-volume stream of contradictory information. Do not worry about consistency. Do not worry about being caught in falsehoods. The volume is the weapon. The contradiction is the weapon, because the human mind cannot process information faster than it can be produced. And when the information is deliberately contradictory, the mind stops trying to determine truth and starts selecting based on preference, identity, emotional resonance. This is not traditional propaganda. Propaganda wants you to believe a specific false thing. Reality erosion does not care what you believe. It wants you to stop believing that truth is determinable at all. It wants you exhausted, confused, unable to distinguish fact from fiction, signal from noise. And in that state of epistemic collapse, you become infinitely manipulable because you have no stable reference point from which to evaluate claims. You select the narrative that feels right, that aligns with your tribe, that confirms what you already suspected. And once everyone is doing this, once we have all retreated into separate information ecosystems with separate facts and separate realities, power operates without constraint because there's no shared framework for holding it accountable. Watch how it works. Make a claim. When challenged, make a different claim that contradicts the first. When that is challenged, claim you never made either statement. When shown evidence, attack the source. When the source is unimpeachable, claim the evidence is out of context. When the full context is provided, change the subject entirely. When forced back to the original point, claim that the people questioning you are biased, corrupt, part of a conspiracy. And throughout all of this, never stop talking. Never allow a single narrative to stabilize. Never permit the conversation to focus long enough for truth to be established. The goal is not to win the argument. The goal is to make argumentation impossible. To create an environment where facts are just opinions, where evidence is just propaganda, where reality itself is just a matter of perspective. Machiavelli understood this 5 centuries before the internet made it a viable strategy at scale. He wrote that the prince must be a great pretender and dissembler, and he must understand that men are so simple and so ready to obey present necessities that the deceiver will always find someone ready to be deceived. But even Machiavelli could not have imagined the technological infrastructure that would allow reality erosion to operate at civilizational scale. Social media platforms optimized for engagement, which means optimized for outrage and tribal signaling. News ecosystems fragmented into ideological silos. The collapse of gatekeeping institutions that once maintained some baseline of factual accuracy. The result is an information environment where the fire hose of falsehood is not just possible but optimal, where the figure who lies most frequently, most boldly, most contradictorily, gains advantage over the figure who tries to maintain consistency and accuracy. The implementation guide, the specific techniques for deploying contradictory narratives, for timing the falsehoods to maximize confusion, for selecting which lies to tell and which truths to admit, for building a coalition that defends your right to define reality itself, that cannot be public because it is a blueprint for epistemic warfare. It is a manual for destroying the very possibility of shared truth. And once that possibility is destroyed, we are not debating policy or ideology or values. We are living in separate universes that happen to occupy the same physical space, and there is no mechanism for resolving disputes except force. This video has employed 7 distinct dark psychology tactics on you. You have been watching an analysis of manipulation while being manipulated. The structure itself is a demonstration of the principles it claims to teach. Did you notice the false choice presented at the beginning? The framing that positioned you as either a practitioner or a mark, eliminating the possibility that you might be neither or both or something outside that binary entirely. Did you catch the repeated use of direct address, the "you have done this" statements designed to create false intimacy and implicate you in the behaviors being described? What about the strategic deployment of uncomfortable truths mixed with flattery? The suggestion that by understanding these patterns, you are somehow elevated above those who remain ignorant, which is itself a form of moral licensing that makes you more receptive to the darker material. The pacing was calculated. The escalation from recognizable tactics to increasingly disturbing frameworks designed to create a sunk cost fallacy where you have invested too much attention to disengage now. The partial reveals, The promises of deeper knowledge behind the paywall, classic scarcity and exclusivity manipulation. The meta-commentary itself, this very revelation, functions as inoculation. By admitting to some manipulations, I create the impression of honesty that makes you less suspicious of the manipulations I am not admitting. And the fact that you are now wondering which manipulations remain hidden is itself part of the design, creating a paranoid hypervigilance that ironically makes you more, not less, susceptible to influence, because you are so busy looking for tricks that you miss the straightforward persuasion happening in plain sight. The full breakdown, all 7 tactics explained with timestamps and psychological mechanisms, available only to subscribers. Not because of artificial scarcity, though that is certainly a factor, but because the complete analysis would allow you to reverse engineer the entire structure. And that level of media literacy is genuinely threatening to the entire ecosystem of influence that includes this video, every advertisement, every political speech, every sermon, every sales pitch. The moment you can fully deconstruct persuasion, you become very difficult to persuade. And that makes you useless to everyone trying